What happens when a coach lets prejudice cloud his judgment? When he denies a talented athlete her chance, he unknowingly sets the stage for a revelation that will change everything. In a world where talent should define success, some find themselves fighting not just for recognition, but for the very opportunity to prove their worth. This is a story about a young woman whose determination transcended rejection, a coach whose biases blinded him to greatness, and a moment of reckoning that no one saw coming. Alicia, a gifted runner with dreams bigger than her circumstances, was overlooked. But she wasn't just going to accept it. She was about to change the game, and not just for herself. Her story would force everyone to confront their assumptions, challenge their beliefs, and reconsider what it means to truly see talent. It's a story about perseverance, growth, and the power of self-belief when the odds are stacked against you. Alicia was not the typical athlete Coach Stanton had in mind when he thought of his star runners. She wasn't flashy, she didn't come from a well-off family, and on the surface, she didn't fit the team dynamic he favored. But what he couldn't see, what many failed to see, was that Alicia had a fire inside her, one that no circumstance could extinguish. She was the kind of athlete who lived for the thrill of the race, someone who had spent years pushing through physical pain and emotional struggles just to get a chance. But even as Alicia laced up her worn-out sneakers and stepped onto the track, Coach Stanton already had his mind made up. From the moment the tryouts began, Alicia showed what she was made of. Her feet barely touched the ground as she cut through the air with speed that left the others in the dust. Her form was clean, her focus laser-sharp. Every step she took was deliberate, showing the years of dedication she'd poured into her training. Yet despite her impressive performance, the coach's eyes barely lingered on her. Instead, he praised the athletes he deemed team material, athletes who fit the mold he'd constructed in his mind. Those who were tall, those who had the right look, and those who seemed to blend seamlessly into the team's pre-established dynamic. Alicia didn't fit that mold, and to Coach Stanton, that was all that mattered. He watched as she crossed the finish line ahead of everyone else, but when it came time to make decisions, his judgment was clouded by preconceived notions. "I'm sorry, Alicia," he said, dismissing her with a few cold words that cut deeper than any injury. "You're just not cut out for the big leagues. Maybe try another sport." In that moment, Alicia's heart sank. She had worked so hard, pushing herself to the limit in ways most couldn't even understand. But her coach didn't see her potential. He saw only the surface. What he didn't realize was that Alicia's talent wasn't bound by his limitations. Little did he know, Alicia was already being scouted by university coaches who saw the raw talent she possessed. They saw past the exterior, past the lack of sponsorship, and past the fact that she didn't fit the traditional mold. They saw someone who could run faster than almost anyone else, someone who had the heart and the drive to make it. Alicia wasn't just another runner. She was a rising star. But in this moment, Coach Stanton, blinded by his biases, had no idea what he was turning away. After that crushing rejection, Alicia could have walked away. Many athletes would have, but not her. The fire inside her had only grown stronger. Her family's words echoed in her mind, her mother telling her to never give up, no matter how hard the world made it seem. Her father, despite his own struggles, told her that talent was a gift, but hard work was what separated those who succeeded from those who didn't. With their encouragement, Alicia made a choice. She wasn't going to let Coach Stanton's dismissive words define her future. She wasn't going to let the lack of a spot on the team stop her from chasing her dream. Every morning before the sun came up, Alicia was already lacing up her shoes. She'd sneak out of her house, careful not to wake anyone, and make her way to the local park. The cold air stung her lungs, but she didn't care. She had a goal, and nothing, no rejection, no lack of support, no empty promises, was going to stop her from reaching it. Alicia pushed herself harder than she ever had before. Every sprint felt like it was taking her closer to the finish line of her dreams. Her legs burned, her chest heaved, but she kept going. She ran for hours, setting personal bests that no one was there to witness except for the empty field and the early morning mist. When the sun began to rise, she'd head home, exhausted but driven, knowing that the work she was putting in would one day pay off. In the quiet of those early hours, Alicia knew that she was doing more than just training her body. She was training her mind. She was learning resilience. She was learning that sometimes the only person who can believe in you is yourself. And that's all she needed. But what Alicia didn't realize, what she couldn't have known, was that her hard work wasn't going unnoticed. There was someone watching. A local university scout who had seen the videos of Alicia's unofficial workouts posted by her friends had decided to pay her a visit. The scout, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes and a keen sense of talent, had quietly attended one of Alicia's morning practice sessions. He watched as she pushed herself relentlessly. He saw her potential before anyone else did. There was no mistaking it. Alicia was something special. Afterward, the scout approached her cautiously, knowing the delicate nature of the situation. He offered her a chance, a scholarship, a real shot at making something of herself in the sport. But there was a catch. He couldn't just hand it over. "You have to compete, Alicia," he told her, his voice calm but firm. "I can't offer you a scholarship based on unofficial training. You have to show me, show the world, that you belong on that track. You need to compete in an official event." Alicia's heart skipped a beat. Her one opportunity, her chance to prove herself, was now within reach. But she knew the stakes. She couldn't afford to fail. It was no longer just about her personal dream. It was about proving to herself and to others that she was worthy of a place among the best. "I'll do it," Alicia said, determination flooding her voice. "I'll race, and I'll show you what I can do." But even as Alicia's chances seemed to rise, there was still one obstacle standing in her way. Coach Stanton, the man who had dismissed her, who had told her she wasn't cut out for the team, was still in charge. So Alicia did what no one expected her to do. She confronted him. One afternoon, after another grueling solo practice, Alicia marched into Coach Stanton's office. She wasn't angry. She was calm, but resolute. She'd come to make her case, to show him that she wasn't giving up. "Coach, I know you think I'm not good enough for the team," she began, standing tall before him. "But I'm asking for a chance. Just one chance to prove that I belong. I'm not asking for a spot on the team. I just need you to believe in me." Coach Stanton didn't look at her. His gaze remained focused on the papers in front of him, his fingers tapping impatiently on the desk. "I've already told you, Alicia," he said, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "It's not personal. It's just the way things are. You don't fit the team dynamic. You don't look the part." Alicia's heart sank, but she didn't back down. "That's not fair," she said, her voice firm. "It's not about looks. It's about the work I've put in, the hours I've spent. I deserve a chance." Stanton sighed, still avoiding her gaze. "There's nothing more to discuss," he said coldly, dismissing her once more. But what the coach failed to realize was that Alicia's story was no longer just hers to tell. The world was watching. While Alicia continued to push herself in private, something else was happening, something she hadn't anticipated. Her classmates, impressed by the raw power and determination they'd seen in her training, had begun to share clips of her early morning sessions online. They went viral. The videos gained traction fast. Suddenly, Alicia wasn't just the quiet girl who trained alone in the park. She was a local sensation. People started noticing her dedication, her speed, her drive. They shared her story, rallying behind her, and before long, Alicia had an online following, one that was eager to see her succeed. Her name started popping up on local blogs, and her story spread throughout the community. She was no longer just another athlete who had been overlooked. She was an underdog, and the whole town was cheering for her. The spotlight had shifted from Coach Stanton's narrow vision to the undeniable talent that Alicia embodied. She was proving that hard work and self-belief were more powerful than any bias or preconceived notion. And then came the moment that would change everything. A rival school's coach, who had seen Alicia's videos, reached out to her with an offer. He wanted her to race in an open track meet, an event where she could compete against some of the best athletes in the region. "This meet isn't just another race," the coach told her. "It's your one shot at proving that you belong. We've all seen what you can do. Now you just have to show the rest of the world." It was a terrifying, exhilarating opportunity. Alicia had never been given a chance like this before. She wasn't officially on a team. She didn't have the backing of a coach who believed in her, but she had something even more powerful, a fire that no one could extinguish. This was her moment, the one she had been working for, the one where she could prove that she wasn't just another athlete. It was her time to show that she was exceptional. This meet wasn't just another race. It was Alicia's one shot at proving she belonged. The stage was set. The race would determine her future. Would she finally get the chance she'd been working for, or would her dreams slip through her fingers once more? The track meet was on the horizon, and Alicia felt the weight of it all pressing down on her. She'd been working towards this moment for what seemed like an eternity, but the closer she got, the heavier the challenges became. There was no one to rely on but herself, and that often felt like too much. It wasn't just about training anymore. It was about balancing everything: school, work, the constant pressure of trying to make ends meet for her family. She had always known that life wasn't going to be easy, but now with her dream so close, she was starting to feel the full weight of what it would take to make it. She'd wake up early to train before school, squeeze in some hours at her part-time job, then come home and hit the books, only to start the cycle over again the next day. Her body was exhausted, and her mind was stretched thin, but Alicia couldn't afford to stop. She couldn't afford to slow down. Every morning, as the alarm rang, she would find herself lying in bed, fighting the pull of exhaustion, but she'd remind herself of why she was doing this: for her family, for herself, for the chance to prove that no one could define her limits except for her. But even with the belief of her family behind her, there were days when the weight of it all felt too much. Her legs felt like lead after hours of training, her head heavy from studying, and the worry of letting down her family crept in like a shadow she couldn't shake. She'd sit on the edge of her bed at night, the silence of the house pressing in, wondering if all of this was worth it. And then she would think about her mom's voice, the way it always sounded when she said, "Don't you ever give up. You've got this." Her dad, too, reminding her that she had a gift that the world needed to see. Their support was her anchor, the thing that pulled her out of her doubts when they threatened to drown her. Even on her hardest days, when she could barely keep her eyes open from fatigue, Alicia would push through because she knew the opportunity was rare. She couldn't afford to waste it. Even in her lowest moments, Alicia held on to hope, knowing that talent wasn't enough. She had to prove herself. Meanwhile, Coach Stanton was dealing with his own pressures. The whispers in the school halls had grown louder. Alicia's reputation was spreading, and so were the rumors about the coach who had dismissed her, the one who refused to give her a chance despite her undeniable talent. He could hear the chatter, but he had a job to do, a team to lead, and expectations to meet. The school board was breathing down his neck. They had their favorites: athletes who fit a certain image, students with a background, an appearance, a personality that aligned with the image of success they wanted for their program. They didn't care about the raw talent or the unseen hours of work. They cared about the appearance, the performance that could bring in recognition, trophies, and sponsors. Coach Stanton had always played the game. He had learned long ago that coaching was more than just about developing athletes. It was about keeping up appearances, pleasing the people who could make or break your program. And Alicia, with her quiet intensity and the lack of a polished team fit, didn't fit the mold. Yet as the whispers about her grew louder, something inside Stanton began to shift. He couldn't deny it anymore. The fact was, Alicia was an exceptional athlete, and he had seen it from the beginning, even if he had refused to acknowledge it. But that truth conflicted with everything he had been taught about coaching, about who he should favor, about who would bring the team and the school recognition. How could he go back now and offer Alicia a place? How could he undo the damage of his past decisions? And still the whispers persisted, even as he tried to tune them out. He started hearing them from his colleagues, from the parents of the athletes he had favored, and from his own conscience, nagging him in the quiet moments when he was alone. It wasn't just that Alicia had talent, it was that she was unlike any athlete he had seen before. Her drive, her focus, her unwillingness to give up even when the world seemed to ignore her. It made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: doubt. He couldn't admit it, but deep down, he knew Alicia was unlike any athlete he'd seen before. It was a truth that haunted him, one that kept him awake at night. But for Coach Stanton, admitting he had been wrong meant facing his own failures, and that was something he wasn't ready to do. Not yet. He told himself it was too late, that he had already made his choice. But deep down, a small part of him wondered if Alicia would have made the team if things had gone differently. If he hadn't been so quick to dismiss her. If he had taken the time to see her for what she truly was, a remarkable athlete, someone who was going to prove him wrong. In the meantime, Alicia was still fighting against the doubts that occasionally crept in, fighting against the physical exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. With the track meet looming, she pushed herself harder, determined to make her mark. It was no longer about making Coach Stanton see her value. It was about proving to herself that she could overcome everything life had thrown at her. But there were moments late at night when she could barely keep her eyes open, when she wondered if she could continue. She was human after all. She was allowed to have those thoughts. But each time they came, she would remember what her family had sacrificed for her, the sacrifices they had made for her to have this chance. She would remember her own dream, the one that was too big for anyone to take away from her. She had fought for this moment, and no matter how hard it got, she wasn't going to let it slip through her fingers. And as Alicia trained, Coach Stanton continued to struggle with his inner conflict. The more Alicia's story spread, the more it gnawed at him. He had been coaching for years, seen countless athletes come and go. But Alicia was different. She was a force, one that he couldn't ignore any longer. Yet he did. He kept his distance, telling himself it was too late, telling himself that his loyalties were to the team he had built, to the students he had already chosen. But the weight of his decision began to eat away at him. He didn't want to acknowledge it, but deep down, he knew he had made a mistake. Alicia was one of the best athletes he had ever seen, and the more he watched her, the more he felt the sting of his own pride. She was the one who got away, and there was nothing he could do to change that now. The day of the track meet arrived, and Alicia's heart was pounding, not from fear, but from the weight of everything she had fought for. The crowd at the meet was a mix of students, parents, and coaches from different schools, but Alicia wasn't focused on them. She was focused on the one thing that had consumed her thoughts for months, proving herself. She'd trained for this moment every single day, every hour spent running in the park, every drop of sweat, every early morning. This was what it was all for. The field before her was more than just a track. It was her opportunity to show the world what she was capable of, to show that she was more than just the girl Coach Stanton had dismissed. It wasn't about proving him wrong anymore. It was about proving to herself that she could overcome all the obstacles life had thrown her way. The race began, and Alicia took off with the force of someone who knew exactly what was at stake. There was no hesitation in her steps, no second guessing. Every stride was powerful and precise, her focus unwavering. Her competitors struggled to keep pace, their attempts at gaining ground futile as she surged ahead. Her body felt strong, fluid, her lungs, though burning, powered through each breath with the sheer will to finish what she had started. It wasn't just the race she was winning, it was her own personal battle. Every mile of training, every sacrifice, every doubt she had silenced in her mind was now being transformed into the fuel for her success. As Alicia crossed the finish line, the sound of the crowd erupted in a mixture of shock and admiration. She didn't just win, she dominated the race in a way that left no room for questions. The other athletes crossed the finish line much later, their exhaustion clear, but Alicia stood there, catching her breath, her chest rising and falling, her body humming with the power of the race she had just completed. It was a perfect performance, a moment of clarity, of pure achievement. It was a moment that no one would forget. As the coaches and the crowd watched the race's final stretch, Stanton's eyes landed on her, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir within him. There she was, Alicia, the girl he had so easily pushed aside, and there she was, flying across the track, leaving her competitors in her wake. The race ended, but the realization hit him hard. Alicia wasn't just good. She wasn't just talented. She was something more. She was extraordinary. Stanton stood there, frozen for a moment, unable to comprehend what he had just witnessed. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't some lucky moment where everything had come together. No, this was Alicia's true potential on display. Raw, unfiltered, and undeniable. Alicia was more than he had ever given her credit for. After the race, Alicia was surrounded by her family and a few supporters who had seen her rise to the occasion. The crowd had started to thin out, but the buzz of her victory was still palpable. As she stood there catching her breath, her coach from the rival school came over, giving her a nod of respect and a few words of encouragement. But as the crowd dispersed, Alicia heard a familiar voice call her name. It was Coach Stanton. He approached her with a look on his face that was a mixture of surprise and regret, his posture slightly hunched as though weighed down by the reality of what he had just witnessed. "Alicia," he began, his voice steady but filled with something she couldn't quite place. I, I never saw it before. I didn't believe in you, and for that, I'm sorry. But after today, you've earned a place on my team." For a moment, Alicia didn't know how to respond. The words were exactly what she had always dreamed of hearing from him, but they felt hollow. He hadn't believed in her when it mattered most. And while the offer was tempting, it wasn't enough to undo the hurt. She took a deep breath and looked him in the eyes, her expression calm but resolute. "You didn't believe in me," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "But I believed in myself, and that's all I needed." There was no anger in her words, only the truth. She didn't need his validation anymore. She had spent so long doubting herself, waiting for someone to see her potential. But now she understood something far more important. She didn't need anyone's approval. She had always known who she was, and now the world knew it too. Coach Stanton opened his mouth to say something else, but Alicia was already walking away, her family following close behind. She didn't need to hear any more apologies. She had earned her place on that track today, and no one could take that away from her. It was a moment he couldn't deny. Alicia wasn't just good, she was extraordinary. As Alicia walked away from the meet, her steps were lighter than they had been in years. The weight that had been pressing on her shoulders for so long seemed to lift with each stride. The victory was hers, but more than that, it was a symbol of everything she had fought for. Coach Stanton stood there, watching her go, his mind racing as the truth of what he had missed settled in. Alicia hadn't just earned a spot on a team, she had earned her own place in the world, and for the first time, Coach Stanton wasn't sure if he would ever be able to fully understand just how much he had underestimated her. But Alicia didn't need him to understand. She had found her own way. And in that moment, she realized that sometimes the most important thing isn't the approval of others. It's the belief in yourself. Months passed since that pivotal day at the track meet, but for Alicia, everything had changed. The acceptance letters came flooding in from universities, each one more impressive than the last. But it was the letter from the top school that caught her by surprise, the one she never thought she'd have a chance to attend, the one that had been her dream for so long, a full-ride scholarship. Her family was overjoyed, and Alicia couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication, though she never sought it. The scholarship wasn't just a ticket to a bright future, it was a testament to everything she had overcome. It was proof that determination could break through any wall, that talent could shine despite the odds stacked against it. The community, once skeptical, began to rally behind her. Alicia's name became synonymous with perseverance and grit. She had shown everyone that no matter where you came from, no matter what others believed about you, your worth was not determined by someone else's limitations.